Senator Askew, move to question time.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Attorney-General, Senator Watt. Senator, yesterday in your answer to a question about the new drug laws introduced by ACT Labor, you said, and I quote, "It is important to recognise that the changes that the ACT have made have been in relation to small quantities of these substances for personal consumption." End quote. Senator, these laws will allow people to carry up to a gram of heroin or 1.5 grams of ice. According to the US Department of Justice, that is enough heroin to kill 5 people. And yet in the ACT, your infringement would be smaller than the fine you would receive for parking outside your space at a shopping centre. Can you please clarify the government's position on how much ice or heroin it is appropriate to carry for personal use? And can you also advise whether other jurisdictions, including New South Wales, have raised concerns with these laws?
Thank you, Senator Askew. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Askew. Well, for the second time in 2 days, the opposition is asking about a matter that is completely the responsibility of a state or territory government, a democratically elected parliament. So I made the point,
Order.
Senator Askew.
Order.
Senator Askew.
Order. Senator Ruston, I've just called the chamber to order. Minister Watt, please continue.
Senator Askew has referred to part of my answer yesterday, and of course the majority of my answer yesterday was to point out that this is completely a state and territory issue. Whether or not drug use is criminalised is 100% an issue for state and territory criminal law. As I said yesterday, most of us come to this place to debate serious national matters that concern the Commonwealth of Australia, and we are, of course, taking the matter of trafficking of illicit drugs seriously, as I mentioned yesterday. But this bill was passed through the ACT Legislative Assembly in October 2022, and a number of Liberal Party members of the ACT Parliament voted for that legislation. But most interestingly, this morning on the radio, the ACT Liberal leader, Elizabeth Lee, said, quote, "The Canberra Liberals will always stand up for territory rights, and I'm very concerned about any step to diminish that. I do not agree with this action taken by the federal coalition to seek to overturn legislation was passed by the ACT Assembly." So this stunt from the federal Liberal Party doesn't even have the support of the ACT Liberal Party. Did you pick up the phone and talk to the ACT Liberals before you decided to ask questions about this? Did you pick up the phone and talk to the ACT Liberals before you decided to introduce a stunt of a private senator's bill this morning? Your only party doesn't even support what you're doing. I mean, we know you don't have any ACT Liberals in the Senate anymore. You don't even have a Liberal Party member in the Senate anymore from the ACT.
Minister Watt. Thank you, Minister Watt. Senator Askew, first supplementary.
Thank you. Senator, as you are no doubt aware, the ACT criminal laws are applied in the Jervis Bay Territory, on some flights, and to Australian ships or Australians on foreign ships in some circumstances. Can the minister confirm police will need to enforce ACT Labor's drug charter in places outside the ACT, including ships and planes?
Thank you, Senator Askew. Minister Watt.
I'm not going to get into matters that are completely the responsibility of a state and territory government. And matters.
Minister
well,
Watt.
last time I looked, there weren't ships floating around the ACT, unless you're talking about Lake Burley Griffin.
Resume your seat, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, President. On a point of order, the minister has just in the early stages gone to the "I'm not going to get into a state or territory matter" response yet again. Yet the specific question asked by Senator Askew went very directly to the impact on matters outside of ACT territorial boundaries and the impact on Australian ships, Australian planes and other areas of law enforcement.
Thank
I ask you to
Senator
draw the minister to the specifics of the question.
I will draw the minister to the question. Thank you, Minister.
What I can tell the Senate is that the Albanese government takes the border measures relating to the trafficking of illegal drugs extremely seriously, and I commend our Australian Border Force officers and the AFP for their hard work in ensuring that we keep as many of these substances out of Australia as possible. In fact, there has been an increased effort from the Australian Border Force on these matters. For the 2022-23 financial year, the ABF made 4,296 detections of cocaine at the border, with an estimated total weight of 4,769 kilograms. This represents—
Minister Watt, please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
President, a further point of order on direct relevance. I appreciate the minister is talking about Commonwealth enforcement in relation to drug trafficking. However, again, the specific question asked by Senator Askew went to the enforcement of these laws and their applicability in other circumstances that are outside the ACT territory. It's specific to these laws about possession, not trafficking, their applicability. The minister doesn't know. He should take it on notice.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. I'll remind the minister of the question. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. And as I was saying, this represents, in relation to cocaine, a 166% increase in the weight of detections from the previous financial year. So that's what's happening under the Albanese government. But as for what the ACT government does, it's a matter for them to decide.
Thank you, Minister Watt. The time for answering has expired. Senator Askew, second supplementary.
Thank you. Senator, these new drugs will need to be enforced by the AFP. But even if police were forced to carry measuring devices to determine weight, there is no clarity on whether the new laws apply to mixed weight or pure weight drugs. They do not have the capacity to determine the substance type, and there is no clarity on how it works alongside Commonwealth law. How will the AFP enforce this?
Minister Watt.
Well, again, these are all very good matters to put to the ACT Parliament, who have the responsibility for passing this legislation. Now, we know that the federal coalition has a long history of trampling over territory rights. They've done it for the Northern Territory, they've done it for the ACT in relation to euthanasia laws, and now they're doing it in relation to drug decriminalisation laws. And it would appear, as I say, that they don't even have support from the ACT Liberal Party when they decide to stomp into this chamber to trample on territory rights. There are other occasions when federal Liberals have stood up for territory rights. In fact, one of them is sitting right there, Senator Birmingham. It was always anachronistic for the Commonwealth to have decided that the one limitation on the territories compared to the states would be on the questions of voluntary euthanasia or voluntary assisted dying. So there was a time when Senator Birmingham stood up for territory rights, but we know that Senator Birmingham stopped standing up for anything quite a long time ago.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Urquhart. Senator Urquhart, please resume. Senator Scarr.
President, that was an awful personal
Senator
reflection.
Scarr, why are you on
personal
your feet?
reflection.
Senator...
There was a personal reflection that.
Okay, thank you, Senators. Order. No interjections across the chamber. Senator Scarr.
There was a personal reflection. The phrase used, which was an awful.
Senator Scarr, do not repeat the phrase. I will. I didn't hear it because.
You should withdraw.
Senator Scarr, please. Resume your seat. In the spirit of a harmonious chamber, if that's possible, Senator Watt, if you would withdraw the rumble.
I withdraw.
Thank you. Senator Urquhart.
Thank you, President. My question is to Senator Gallagher, representing the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Today, Michael Long concludes his second long walk from Melbourne to Canberra, advocating for a voice to Parliament. Since his first walk in 2004 to combat racial discrimination, we've made meaningful strides, including the apology to the stolen generations. This time, Mr Long used his walk to advocate we take the next steps together, recognition and practical action through The Voice. Can the minister explain how The Voice will empower Indigenous Australians in key areas like health, education and housing?
Thank you, Senator Urquhart. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Urquhart for the question and for the support she's providing in Tasmania for the campaign for a voice to our Parliament and constitutional recognition for First Nations Australians. Listening to the advice of The Voice will help inform decisions to direct funds where they will have the most impact and deliver the best outcomes in those key areas of Indigenous health, education, employment and housing. We're still seeing around an 8-year gap in life expectancy between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people compared with other Australians. Nationally, 68.1% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people aged 20 to 24 years had attained Year 12 or equivalent qualification, compared to 90.7% of non-Indigenous Australians. And only 81.4% of Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people living are living in appropriately sized, not overcrowded housing, compared with 93.5% of non-Indigenous Australians. What we are doing now is not working, and it's time for us to walk a different path together as a nation, to change the structure of how we make decisions that affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and then change the outcomes. That is what this referendum is about. It's about bringing the country together and working with each other to drive those better outcomes. As Michael Long so powerfully said this morning in Canberra, and I quote, "I don't want to be talking about closing the gap in another 20 years or 30 years. Let's do something about it, you know, and part of that is being able to advocate on issues that affect Indigenous people. We haven't got it right yet. It's unbelievable that in 2023 we haven't got this right. But on October the 14th, we have a chance to make this right. On referendum day, each one of us can take action to close the gap by voting yes for constitutional recognition through a voice to our nation's parliament."
Thank you, Minister. Senator Urquhart, first supplementary.
Thank you. Michael Long's journey along the 660-kilometre route from Melbourne is not just a walk. It's a dialogue, a testament to the transformative power of listening. He's engaged with Australians one conversation at a time. Inspired by Mr Long's example, how will the act of listening enable us to make decisions that genuinely reflect the needs and aspirations of Indigenous Australians?
Thank you, Senator Urquhart. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Urquhart for the supplementary. Michael Long's walk is indeed an example of listening and engaging, and it's one that we can all learn from. By listening to the voice, we can make decisions that genuinely reflect the needs and aspirations of Indigenous Australians. There is no doubting that we will make better decisions when we listen, and the outcomes are better when those directly affected can have a say. Listening to the advice of the voice will help inform decisions about funding, where they will have the most impact and deliver better outcomes in those key areas. We know that ensuring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a say on the matters that affect communities will deliver better value for money. And governments from both sides have invested billions in programs that haven't delivered the outcomes or worked for local communities. A voice will help us listen to locals and ensure that money is invested in those areas that will drive better outcomes. By incorporating the voice into our decision-making processes, we're not just improving programs or policies, we're fostering a more inclusive, respectful and united Australia.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Urquhart, second supplementary.
As Michael Long concludes his second long walk today, we are reminded of our shared opportunity to begin a new journey, embracing and listening. Minister, can you elaborate on how the voice will ensure Indigenous voices aren't just heard, but are central to decisions that shape a brighter, more inclusive future for all Australians?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President, and thanks, Senator Urquhart. As Michael Long concluded his walk today, we are reminded that we have a shared opportunity for a fresh start. By embracing the voice, we're not just listening, we are acting. And in doing so, we are paving the way for a brighter, more harmonious future for everybody. We saw this in action this morning when representatives from across the political spectrum, including from members of the opposition, where they joined the Prime Minister and Michael Long in Canberra to walk for the voice. And we'll see this spirit of togetherness in action on Sunday when across Australia anyone is able to join their local community walk and walk in support of an Indigenous voice to Parliament. The reasons to vote yes are simple and compelling and really come down to those three main reasons: about respect, about recognition, and finally about delivering better outcomes for First Nations people. And I hope that in the next few weeks, up until the 14th of October, that we all ensure that a dignified and respectful debate in the lead-up to that day.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Farrell. Minister, given the widespread concerns about the Minister for Transport's decision to protect Qantas from additional competition by Qatar Airways, especially from those from Australian exporters in the tourism industry, is the government considering reviewing its decision on Qatar Airways?
Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Canavan for his question. The issue, of course, in this respect is an issue for the Minister for Transport, Minister Catherine King. She made the original decision to decline the offer of Qatar to increase its services, and of course she has a responsibility to determine whether any airline should be allowed extra slots in Australian airports. I have said on a number of occasions that if Qatar wanted to get some extra flights into Australia, of course they could come into Adelaide, and they've got one service a day. Yes, well, I'll take that intervention from Senator Birmingham. So could Qantas, and Qantas does not have a single international flight out of Adelaide, and haven't done so for 10 long years. And I would very much welcome additional flights from Qatar out of Adelaide, which they can do right now. They could do that right now, and I would also welcome any flights from Qantas. But the answer to your direct answer to your question, Senator Canavan, is that this is an issue with the Minister for
Minister.
Transport.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Canavan, first supplementary.
Well, no answer there. But, Minister, there are reports that the Austrade stand at Fine Food Australia, a leading food industry trade event, has been restricted to Indigenous-only businesses. Is this correct? Are all of the 15 producers featured on this stand actually exporters? And how does this policy help the many other Australian exporters who will face extra logistics costs because the government insists on there being fewer flights out of Australia?
Just a moment, Minister Farrell. I've got Minister Gallagher.
Look, I'm sure I know what Minister Gallagher is going to say. That this has no relevance at all to the initial question, but I'm happy to answer it because—
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Senator Canavan.
President, I think Senator Farrell's making a point of order. So just on that issue, the original question specifically asked about the complaints of Australian exporters and the costs of them in this decision, and so does this supplementary. So
yes,
I reject that point
Senator
of order.
Canavan, I would say it's quite thin, but there's a link there, and the Minister is answering your question. Minister Farrell.
Thank you.
A glancing, yes. Thank you.
Well, you'll get a direct answer, right? Yeah. Surprise, surprise.
Order.
It must be the end of 2 weeks in the Senate question time. Look, regrettably, there has been, I think, some misinformation about what has been occurring at the Fine Food Australia exhibit, and I'd like this opportunity, thank you, Senator Canavan, to correct the situation. There's something like 850 exhibitors at this event from across Australia, food, beverage and hospitality sector. Of the 300 face-to-face interviews that Austrade organised for the participants, only 15
Minister.
of them—
The time for answering has expired. Senator Canavan, second supplementary.
Okay. All right. Why have the Prime Minister and Minister King let the uncertainty and confusion surrounding their rejection of more flights in and out of Australia drag on for weeks? Given the perceived quid pro quo deal between the government and Qantas as the flagship corporate supporter of the Yes campaign and the Voice referendum, is it time the Prime Minister to cut his ties with Qantas and Alan Joyce?
Minister Farrell.
Well,
order across the chamber. Order. Senator Ayres. Order. Order on both sides. Minister Farrell, please continue.
thank you, President, and I thank Senator Canavan for his second supplementary question. I don't think there could be anybody in this chamber that could not have seen the reaction by Labor members of Parliament, including great senators like Senator Sheldon, to the decision yesterday by the High Court to make it very clear that actions by Qantas to sack 1,700 of their workforce and replace them, actions that you supported, actions where you supported Qantas. I don't think anybody.
Order on my right. Senator McKenzie, I remind you, you do not stand and then move to a point of order. You wait until I call you. Senator McKenzie.
Point of order.
Yes.
Direct relevance. Senator Canavan's question was about cutting ties with Qantas as the Yes campaign flagship, given the High Court decision yesterday.
I thank you, Senator McKenzie. The minister is being relevant to the question. Minister Farrell, please continue.
Thank you, President. Look, it was your government that supported Qantas when they illegally sacked.
Minister Farrell, the time for answering has expired. Senator Orman-Payne.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Education, Minister Watt. Minister, this year more than 100,000 public school kids will graduate having never attended a public school that was funded to its minimum level of need. Yep. With underfunding meaning growing teacher shortages and declining NAPLAN results, will the government listen to students, parents and carers, unions and teachers, urgent calls for help to save our public schools and get them to 100% of their minimum funding requirement at the start of the next National School Reform Agreement?
Thank you, Senator Orman-Payne. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Orman-Payne. Senator Orman-Payne, I answer this question as a proud product of the public schooling system. My children attend the public schooling system. Most of my family have taught in the public sector system, so I'm very happy to speak up for the public education system. And the Minister for Education, Mr Clare, has said that Australia has a good education system, but it can be a lot better and a lot fairer. And of course, funding of schools is an important component of this. The Albanese government is committed to ensuring that every child has access to high-quality education and is supported to achieve regardless of their location, background or socio-economic status. We are committed to working with the states and territories to get every school to 100% of its fair funding level, and negotiations on that are well underway with the states and territories. For government schools, funding per student is growing year on year, including an increase of 7% over the last year, from $3,829 per student in 2022 to $4,096 in 2023. Some non-government schools are currently being funded above 100% of the schooling resource standard, while under current funding arrangements, most government schools will never get 100% of the SRS. The government's commitment, and I'll take that interjection, Senator O'Neill, that is the legacy of course, of 10 years of coalition government. The government's commitment will ensure that every school is appropriately resourced and able to provide a high-quality education to all students. Funding is critical, but so is what it does. The current National School Reform Agreement was signed off in 2018 by the member for Cook, Mr Morrison, and it speaks to the wasted decade and missed opportunities in school education. So, as I say, these matters are currently under negotiation with the states and territories, but the intent of the government is clear.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Orman-Payne, first supplementary.
Minister, with only vague talk of a pathway to full funding sometime in the indeterminate future, has the government joined the opposition in consigning another generation of public school kids to a further decade of underfunding, permanently baking in inequality into our education system?
Thank you, Senator Orman-Payne. Minister Watt.
Well, I would have thought that the previous answer I gave showed that our approach is completely different to that of the coalition government. And I know that it doesn't suit the Greens' political frame, lib-lab, lumping everyone in together, all that nonsense, ignoring the fact that they held up the passage of the housing bill for months through their unholy alliance with the coalition. That coalition was fine, apparently, but any other situation is not. the answer I've given shows that we have a clear commitment to funding of public schools. Many of us on this chamber have a personal commitment to that as well. In fact, I think all of us do, and that's what we're up to in the negotiations with the states and territories now. So, if what you're looking for is another opportunity to say that the Liberals are the same as Labor, you might have to try a little bit harder.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Orman-Payne, second supplementary.
Minister, with less than 2% of public schools across the country being fully funded according to the Schooling Resource Standard, how can a Labor government continue to justify pouring public money into private schools, 98% of which are overfunded?
Thank you, Senator Orman-Payne. Minister Watt.
Well, thank you for giving those of us who went to public schools a lecture about public schools. It's really appreciated. But as I say, the Albanese government's commitment to public schools is obvious and is already apparent from the work that we've been doing since we came to office, and of course to all schools. We acknowledge that parents have the right to choose the education system that suits their family circumstances best, but we do want to make sure that all schools receive adequate funding.
Please resume your seat. Senator Orman-Payne.
Point of order, President. My question went very directly to a time frame, and the minister has not given a time frame in any of his answers to my questions.
It broadly went there, but it also went to the funding, how funding is distributed. The minister is being relevant. Minister.
Thank you, President. Well, I know in the Greens' magical world that never involves actually being in government, you can click your fingers and fix things straight away. We see that repeatedly from the Greens. But if you actually ever have the opportunity to be in government, what you would know is that these things have to be negotiated with states and territory governments because they actually deliver the schooling system. I know that's a detail that will never trouble you, given you will never actually be in government and never have any responsibility. But we're getting on with the job.
The time for answering has expired. Senator O'Neill.
Sorry. Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Minister for Trade and Tourism, Senator Farrell. The first shipment of raw sugar from Australia to United Kingdom under a new bilateral free trade agreement arrived in London last week. Before the United Kingdom joined the EU in 1973, the UK was a major market for Australian sugar. But after the UK joined the EU, Australian sugar exports were crushed because of incredibly high import tariffs. Last week's arrival of the 33,000 metric tonne sugar shipment marked the reopening of a valuable market for Australian sugar producers and exporters. Minister, could you outline what action the Albanese government has taken to pave the way for the first shipment of Australian sugar to the UK in 50 years?
Minister Farrell.
You're a Labor government.
Thank you, President. And can I thank Senator O'Neill for her question in respect of this the sugar exports, and I know the state of New South Wales is one of the states which produces the finest sugar in the world. Thanks to the hard work of the Albanese Labor government to finalise a UK free trade agreement, last week we finalised it. Last week, Australian cane growers witnessed the first shipment of raw sugar arriving in the UK in over 50 years. And now, consumers across the UK will be celebrating the return of Australian-grown sugar to their supermarket shelves. Their scones with jam will be just a little bit sweeter. Go easy.
Order.
Calm down. Calm down.
Order. Order across the chamber. Order. Order. Minister Farrell, please continue.
Some of those Queenslanders will be monarchists, Senator Smith. Prior to the Albanese government implementing Australia's trade agreement with the UK, Australian sugar exports faced extremely high import tariffs. The former coalition government let the industry down by failing to implement an agreement with the United Kingdom. But industry could rely on the Albanese government to clean up the mess that we had been left, and we didn't let them down. we prioritise the trade deal with our close trading partner and friend, the United Kingdom. And the first shipment of tariff-free sugar to the UK market last week is proof that the trade agreement is delivering real, practical benefits for Australian farmers and workers, like those heralding from the great state of Queensland and represented by Cane Growers Organisation, who I met with yesterday. But the Senate can be assured that Australian sugar industry isn't the only industry
Thank you,
where
Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator O'Neill, first supplementary.
Thank you very much, President. The Australia-United Kingdom Free Trade Agreement is considered a gold standard trade deal. In addition to opening the UK market for Australian sugar, could the minister provide some examples of the other benefits this agreement delivers to Australian farmers, to businesses and to workers?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator O'Neill, for your first supplementary question. And yes, I can provide that information to you because our trade deal with the United Kingdom is a gold standard free trade agreement. It delivers for Australian farmers, businesses and workers by removing import tariffs on over 99% of our $10 billion two-way trade in goods with the United Kingdom. The removal of these border taxes increases opportunities for Australian exports of not only sugar but also beef, sheep meat, wine, honey, dairy and manufactured products like auto parts, electrical equipment and cosmetic products. The agreement also supports our services exporters by making it easier for Australian workers to provide services into the UK market. The Albanese government has delivered a great deal that provides unprecedented benefits for all Australians, creating more higher-paying jobs and commercial opportunities.
Thank you, Minister. Senator O'Neill, second supplementary.
Thank you for that uplifting response, Minister. The implementation of free trade agreements is an important element of the government's trade diversification agenda. Could the minister outline what resources are available to Australian farmers and businesses to seize the opportunities delivered under the Australia-United Kingdom Free Trade Agreement?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator O'Neill for her second supplementary question. And yes, I can answer that question for you, Senator O'Neill, because the Albanese Labor government is supporting Australian businesses to enter or expand in the UK market through a range of export services. Examples of support for Australian exporters to make the most of the UK Free Trade Agreement include free practical assistance from Austrade Trade Start Network to develop export strategies and find valuable contacts in the United Kingdom, including through business missions and trade shows. The financial assistance through the Export Market Development Grants Program to help eligible Australian businesses to get a foothold in the United Kingdom market. Opportunities to participate in the London Landing Pad, where innovative Australian technology companies can scale up into the UK market. These are some of the ways that the Albanese government is helping exporters.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Tyrrell.
Thank you, President. My question is for the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Gallagher. Today is Are You OK Day. We're telling people to have open and honest conversations about their mental health and to reach out if they need to speak to a professional. But when Tasmanians do reach out for professional help, they're put on a waiting list for up to 8 months. There just aren't enough psychologists around to fill the demand for their services. What is the government doing to address the critical workforce shortages in the mental health sector that are currently preventing Tasmanians from getting timely access to care?
Thank you, Senator Tyrrell. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Tyrrell for the question and for her advocacy for her state of Tasmania, and particularly her focus on access to healthcare, because it is a serious issue. It's a serious issue right across the country, but we acknowledge that in Tasmania there are significant workforce shortages. And we need to be putting in place a whole range of responses to that, including training more psychologists, but that will take some time, and the Minister for Health has some measures focused on that to encourage more people, in particularly in psychologists. I think there's certainly a shortage of psychologists here in the ACT, and I know that goes right across the country. So there are issues around how we get more people into university to actually train to be psychologists. Then there's actually how do we manage some particular programs and invest in the workforce in Tasmania in the short term. And I know we've been doing a lot of work with the Tasmanian government, looking at how particularly we can invest in the primary healthcare system in Tasmania, because that's under enormous pressure as well. And we know that GPs do a lot of the mental health support at the moment because of those shortages in those other areas. That responsibility, and it's often the first point of contact for people, is to go to their GP to undertake, if they need a mental health plan. And we're doing some work with the Tasmanian government that you're aware of in relation to the primary care pilots to train general practice workforce. We're also looking at how we can support GP trainees. So a focus on the primary healthcare system in the start, but yes, acknowledge that there's a bigger issue on workforce right across the board, and that's going to take a longer term time to fix.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Tyrrell, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. So the National Mental Health Workforce Strategy report, started under the former government, was supposed to be handed down at the end of 2021. As of right now, it's nowhere to be seen. There are references on a government webpage that says health ministers have endorsed the strategy since July 2023, so I'm guessing they've seen it. It's just not public. Why hasn't the report been released?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I don't actually have any information on that, Senator Tyrrell, so I am happy to undertake, and perhaps in the interim, as we won't be sitting for the Minister for Health, to respond to that directly to you. I know that there has been a huge amount of work being done through health ministers on health workforce. One of the issues was that we had in place before it was abolished, I think, by Peter Dutton, was we had Health Workforce Australia, was an independent body that did the planning around what workforce we need and how to get there over the long term. But unfortunately, that body was established. Not a lot was done in the meantime, and now we are trying to work with states and territories not only to deliver the workers they need right now, but invest in the chain for the future, and that includes looking at how we utilise international workers right across the board. But I will undertake for the Health Minister to respond to you on the specifics.
And Minister, I just remind you to refer to those in the other place by their correct titles. Senator Tyrrell, second supplementary.
I don't think I'll ever be a minister, but thank you. The March budget allocates $60.7 million to implement the 10-year National Mental Health Workforce Strategy. The budget paper suggests that this money is going towards some great programs. But again, there is a little detail available. We just have to take the government's word for it. When can Australians expect to see the National Mental Health Workforce Strategy report and the government's response to it?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Tyrrell for the supplementary, and that's right. I mean, the Minister for Health in our budget did respond in a range of areas. Mental health is one of those areas which needs both a thorough assessment of current programs and investment in new programs, and the Minister for Health is undertaking that. And I acknowledge Senator Tyrrell's questions at estimates in relation to this area, and I'm sure we can have the opportunity in October to go through it in more detail. I think the question relates to this first supplementary, and in that instance I have Minister for Health doesn't know yet, but that I have on his behalf said that he will respond to you directly on those matters.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Bragg.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. On Monday, the Melbourne Herald Sun said the average full-time worker is about $3,700 better off than they were a year ago, according to new data analysis being spruiked by the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. End quote. With the cost of living index up by 9.6% for working households in this past year, core inflation almost twice the top of the RBA's band, interest rates at a 12-year high, and real wages down by 2.7%, can you confirm that the Treasurer is spruiking falsehoods and Australians are actually worse off?
Thank you, Senator Bragg. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. The figures that were used in that article are correct, and I went through. Well,
Senator Birmingham.
no, if Senator Birmingham stops shouting at me, I am responding to this.
Order. Order.
Well, he wasn't whispering. He wasn't whispering. All right. But anyway. Sorry.
Order on my
Why don't you stand up and say that, Senator Cash? Well, why don't you stand up and explain what you just called me? What you both call me all the time.
Minister Gallagher, please resume your seat. I've got Senator Urquhart on her feet.
I would ask Senator Ruston to withdraw that comment, please.
I believe it was Senator Cash. Order. Order. Once again, as I requested earlier, for Senator Watt to withdraw a comment in a harmonious spirit of the chamber, Senator Cash, I would ask you to do likewise.
If it assists the chamber, I will withdraw.
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Gallagher, please continue.
Thank you. And the figures that Senator Bragg referred to in the article are correct, and it relates to the difference in the increase in the WPI that is occurring now under this government when compared to the 10 years, the average over the former government, which I am surprised on the final day that the opposition would again raise wages in their questions. Wages. I mean, on the record that you had, where wages stagnated for a decade, just as productivity did, while the budget got into mess. That's what happened under your watch. Whilst you try and go out there and say you're the serious economic managers, let's have a look at the actual reality. The worst budget and the worst budget deficit we've ever had. Debt, $1 trillion of debt that we inherited with nothing to show for it, wages that had stagnated for a decade, productivity, which for the 10 years you were in government was the lowest productivity increase for 60 years. That's what you achieved. And you would then come in here and want a conversation with us about wages. At the same time, you're voting against almost every cost of living measure that we have brought into this place. Let us not forget what you did when we wanted to give households support for their energy
Minister
bills.
Gallagher, time for answering has expired. Senator Bragg, first supplementary.
No, thanks very much. On top of the new superannuation tax, new taxes on trucking and transport, the government recently allowed ASIC to raise levies on financial advisors from $1,100 to $3,200. This was the first increase in these levies since 2019. During a cost of living crisis, why is the Labor Party making it harder for Australians to access quality financial advice?
Thank you, Senator Bragg. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, my recollection of that, of the funding in that part of ASIC is that it is essentially self-funding or cost recovered, and that is something that the opposition had supported. So now you're telling me that that's not the case, is it? Is that the question that you put to me today? Is that in order to adequately fund and resource ASIC, and that the financial advisors, that is recouped through fees from financial advice, as it is through APRA and other national regulators, that you are now walking away from that position as well, right? So that it's not going to be self-funded, in which case it would come as a cost to the budget, because presumably you would want ASIC appropriately funded in order to regulate the financial system. I would have thought that that is something that we agree on. But I'm not going to take a lecture from those opposite when they have opposed cheaper medicines, they've opposed the energy bill relief, they have opposed extra investment in housing.
Thank you, Minister.
On everything
the time for
you say
answering
no.
has expired. Senator Bragg, second supplementary.
Thanks. Thank you very much. The average family's mortgage repayments are up approximately $22,000 since Labor came to government, with energy bills up by more than 15% and heading to increases of 25%.
Senator Watt.
What is the Treasurer telling Australians? Why is the Treasurer, I should say, telling Australians that they've never had it so good, whilst your policies continue to make a bad situation even worse?
Thank you, Senator Bragg. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. Well, the Treasurer has never used those words, so don't verbal the Treasurer. And in terms of the cost of living measures, it is our priority focus to look at how we can support cost of living relief without adding to the inflation problem in the economy. And that's why we've invested in cheaper medicines. That's why we've invested in cheaper childcare. That's why we're expanding paid parental leave. That's why we're getting wages moving, which is the first question. That's why we're investing in more affordable housing, which you voted about 14 times this week to oppose. That is the action that you've taken when we look at cost of living measures. The stronger safety net, when we've looked at rent assistance, job seeker, parenting payment increase, energy bill relief plan, fee-free TAFE places. These are all focused cost of living measures that support the growth in the economy, that support the productive capacity of the economy without adding to the inflation problem.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Van.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Senator representing the Minister for Small Business, Minister Gallagher. Minister, operating a franchise in Australia is almost impossible when we have legislation that allows franchisors to change the rules as they please. The recent decision handed down by Justice Beach in the Mercedes-Benz dealers case has exposed significant flaws in our current franchising code. Does the government acknowledge that the current franchising code allows for exploitation of franchisees?
Thank you, Senator Van. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Van for the question. And we do acknowledge that the franchising sector plays an important role in our economy. And we have also acknowledged the need to do an independent review of the franchising code of conduct. This falls under the portfolio of the Minister for Small Business, and she has appointed a small business expert, Dr Shaper, to conduct this review. And that review, I think, will assist essentially in getting to the heart of the question that you asked, which is around how is the franchising code working. I understand that consultations have already begun through that work and that the sector is engaged on it, and we look forward to working with Dr Shaper as this review is undertaken. In the meantime, we are doing, of course, a range of measures to support small business, including franchises or franchisees, which help, whether it be through our small business energy incentive relief, whether it be through our energy bill relief, and of course, I think this week introduced into the parliament the instant asset write-off for $20,000 for small business. And I'm working with my colleagues Senator Husic and Senator Collins on ways to ensure the procurement rules support small business and the important role it plays in the economy.
Senator Van, first supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, franchisees are not just workers in their business, they are investors and shareholders. Will the government undertake a thorough review of all legislation, not just the code, to ensure that franchisees are adequately protected?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Van for the question. I think the government's position is that the review of the code is the first step. That, as I said in my first answer, that review of the code is already underway. And one of the questions that the Minister for Small Business has asked of that review is whether the code is fit for purpose. So I think that we would wait for that review to be done before we commit to any further review of legislation. We would be wanting to get that report back, but we also acknowledge there's a role for the ACCC here, and we have committed to establish a designated complaints function within the ACCC, which will come into place from the 1st of July 2024 and will allow small business and advocacy groups to submit a complaint. So that's another avenue, Senator Van.
Senator Van, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Given that franchisees are investors and shareholders in their business and contribute to a sector worth over $184 billion, around 10% of the Australian economy, do you think that franchisees deserve the protection of the Corporations Act, not just the consumer law?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I will see if there's any further information I can provide to Senator Van over that. I think, again, whilst we're in the middle of an independent review, and it may be that those issues that you raise are explored through that review, that the government will wait for that review. But we have also passed a number of pieces of legislation which have, I think, would certainly for small business, which would include franchisees, some changes in relation to unfair contract terms. And that was specifically so that small businesses were in a better position to reach agreement with large partners, but also penalties for unconscionable conduct, false or misleading representations as well. But I would say, Senator Van, that we would look forward to Dr Schaper's independent review of the code before we make any further commitments.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Sheldon.
My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management, Senator Watt. Minister, with fire activity this week throughout the Northern Territory, Queensland and New South Wales, it is evident that the 2023-24 high-risk weather season is upon us. What is the Commonwealth doing to prepare Australia for the coming bushfire season and the future natural disasters we can expect to face?
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Minister Watt.
Thank you, Senator Sheldon, and thank you again for your ongoing work as the government's Special Envoy for Disaster Recovery. The bushfire seasonal outlook for spring, which was released by AFAC last month, is certainly starting to eventuate. We're seeing increased fire activity across the Northern Territory, Queensland and parts of New South Wales over the past week, which serves as a reminder that the higher risk weather season is now upon us. At the national level, we've made a number of changes since Black Summer to be better prepared and to make sure that people are as safe as possible. There's now a new fire danger rating system to more clearly explain to people the level of risks that they face. We're investing more in mitigation and resilience than any government has ever done, and we have an extra large aerial water bomber plane in addition to more large helicopters to do dumps of water as well. We are working closely with state and territory governments, and I know they're increasing their fuel reduction activity where it's safe to do so. Particularly for some of those in New South Wales, the smoke that they're experiencing around Sydney from prescribed burns at the moment may bring back memories of the Black Summer fires. So given that today is Are You OK Day, I really want to encourage those who need help or someone to talk to as they're experiencing some pretty bad memories to reach out for assistance. In 2 weeks' time, the Albanese government will be hosting the first ever National Bushfire Preparedness Summit here in Canberra, bringing together personnel from state and territory governments, emergency services, industry and not-for-profit organisations to share resources and practice national-level coordination and exercises. This is on top of the usual high-risk weather season planning, which involves a range of exercises and briefings across all states and territories and with key stakeholder groups including media, First Nations groups and disability support organisations. We've been planning for this coming season for months now, and we're committed to supporting the states and territories in their planning and preparedness for the months ahead.
Thank you, Minister Watts. Senator Sheldon, first supplementary.
Thank you for the update. It's clear that all Australians must prepare for a difficult natural disaster season. In the last week alone, we've seen bushfires threaten communities in the Barkly region. And I know that the Commonwealth had been working closely with the Northern Territory Government to provide support in the response and immediate recovery. Can the Minister please update the Senate on what exactly is being done to support the Northern Territory in their response to these bushfires?
Minister Watt.
Thanks, Senator Sheldon. And can I start by acknowledging the work of Senator McCarthy, the member for Lingiari and the member for Solomon for their strong interest and advocacy for their communities. They've been in regular contact with me and my office to ensure that their communities are supported through this time. As members may be aware, a large fire, over 1.3 million hectares, is currently burning in the Barkly tableland in the Northern Territory, east of Tennant Creek. And I also acknowledge the interest and efforts of Senator Chisholm in his Assistant Minister role in working with that local community. The Territory Government has issued an emergency situation which grants the police, fire and emergency services additional powers to fight a fire and manage evacuations if the need arises. I understand that conditions are currently relatively stable, but we do need to keep an eye on them. 2 strike teams from South Australia have arrived to assist, and we have deployed Australian Defence Force resources to support the protection of critical infrastructure and establish containment lines. We'll keep working closely with the Northern Territory Government on this.
Senator Sheldon, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, for that update. And regarding the Northern Territory, can the Minister advise the Senate on any existing practices that have been proven to reduce the risks of bushfires?
Minister Watt.
Thanks, Senator Sheldon. In addition to using the latest technology to fight fires, Australia's fire services are increasingly listening to traditional burning practices of our First People to help with preparedness. Yesterday, I joined the ACT Minister Mick Gentleman, along with Parks and Conservation, RFS and Caring for Country staff. And I was very pleased to meet Ngunnawal traditional custodian Brad Bell and his family and learn more about the role that Indigenous knowledge and cultural burning is playing in our fire preparation seasons. Coal burning is increasingly being used to prepare land for bushfires and reduce the fuel load which could burn if a fire came through. Brad was passionate about the joy that he and his family get from being able to share some of the knowledge that their ancestors have had for thousands of years, and that we as communities can learn about and apply in order to better prepare ourselves for fire seasons. Brad spoke about reducing water use by applying Indigenous techniques like cultural burning, as well as the benefits to land management. It's a practical example of what we get when we listen to our Indigenous people and deliver better results.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Farrell. Last year, the Prime Minister promised cheaper electricity, cheaper mortgages, cheaper cost of living and better pay. But instead, Australians have been left with the highest interest rates in 12 years, real wage decline, skyrocketing inflation on fuel and groceries and crippling energy bills. Why are Australians paying the price of the Prime Minister's mismanagement and broken promises to lower costs?
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Colbeck for his question. And my recollection of my recollection,
Order. Please continue, Minister Farrell.
Thank you. My recollection, Senator Colbeck, was that you were sitting over here somewhere before the last election, and you were making decisions that now contributed to all of the economic issues.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, President. On direct relevance, my question was about the Prime Minister's promises, not about where I was sitting in the last term of Parliament, and I'd ask you to draw the Minister to the question.
I will draw the Minister to the question, but I also remind you, Senator Colbeck, there was quite considerable preamble to that question, which the Minister is also, the Minister is entitled to go to. Minister Farrell, please continue, and I've drawn you to the question.
Now, unlike the former government, we do understand the pressure that's on households in all of the areas which you just mentioned. And can I say what this government, the Albanese government, is doing is putting downward pressure on all of those cost of living issues, downward pressure on all of those cost of living things. And remember this, when you had the opportunity to put a cap on gas that would push electricity prices down, what did you do? You voted against it. Now, one issue that you've mentioned is wages. What has this government been doing? Finally, we're getting some movement in wages. We're finally getting some movement in wages.
Order.
Which your government, don't you remember this? Don't you remember Senator Cormann? Senator Cormann, he said it was part of your economic strategy to keep wages low. This government is all about trying to deal with the issue of cost of living, to push up wages and to assist those hard-working Australians.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Colbeck, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. The Prime Minister promised to bring Australians together in the national interest. But Labor's mismanagement and failure to listen on its voice proposal is dividing Australians. Why are Australians paying the price of the Prime Minister's mismanagement and broken promises to unite the nation?
Minister Farrell.
Look, I'm disappointed in that question from you, Senator Colbeck, because this Prime Minister has gone out of his way to try and unite Australians by providing recognition for Indigenous Australians through a voice to this parliament. So I completely reject your proposition. But can I talk about some of the things that the Albanese government has done to assist those people who are finding it tough in the current environment? We've made childcare cheaper. We're making medicines cheaper for historic investments in Medicare, pay rises for aged care workers and increasing in the minimum wage, delivering 480,000 fee-free TAFE positions.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Colbeck, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. The Prime Minister promised that when he was elected there would be transparency, accountability and integrity. But the bungled Qatar decision, the ministerial use of RAAF VIP flights and NDIS costings all demonstrate that Labor isn't interested in transparency or accountability. Why are Australians increasingly being kept in the dark because of the Prime Minister's mismanagement and broken promises?
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Before I call the Minister to answer the question, I'm going to remind senators. Senator Payne. Order.
Well, there's something in the standing orders against breaches of the Geneva Convention against torture by ministers not answering questions.
Senator Payne, as I think this is your last day, we'll just allow that on the voices. But before I call the Minister seriously, the interjections across the chamber are disorderly and disrespectful. I ask all senators to listen in silence. Minister Farrell.
President, and to the point of order, you won't have to do it anymore. But I completely reject the premise. I completely reject the premise of that. I completely reject the premise of that question. And what a cheek! What a cheek! You were sitting in the cabinet. You were sitting in the cabinet while Scott Morrison, the former Prime Minister, was acquiring ministry after ministry after ministry. He didn't even know. He didn't even know that Prime Minister Morrison was the real.
Minister Farrell, Senator Colbeck.
I am sorry to prolong Senator Payne's misery a little longer with another point of order, President, but I do so on direct relevance. My question was about the Prime Minister's broken promises, not about anything that happened in the previous parliament.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. I will remind the Minister of your question. Minister Farrell.
I finished my answer, and I now ask that further questions be put on the notice paper.